have died who were not addicted just because they drank a few beers or drank a little wine and were told, pop this pill, it'll give you a buzz. It'll also kill the part of your brain that tells your body to breathe while you're sleeping. This is a very big deal. And I was proud that Hillary was the first person to speak up on it and propose a $10 billion plan to deal with it. Our foundation worked very hard to get the first nasal spray injection of Narcan available, and the net effect will be to save about $40 a dose on giving it out. This is a really big deal. We need it on every college campus, in every dorm, in every police department, everywhere. It is literally a miracle drug. And so there are lots of issues like that. People who are dealing with families with Alzheimer's and all the attendant consequences if you don't have any paid family leave. So it's about who can understand that. We need broadly inclusive economics, but we need inclusive social policies too that recognize that as time goes on, life works out differently for different people. And if you got one country, we should try to allow everybody to live as long and as well as they can and to do it together. The third thing the election's about is how we're going to keep America safe and still keep it America. Preserve our individual liberties and our reputation for being an open country, our belief in diversity, and our understanding that one of our great meal tickets in the next 20 years is going to be there's somebody here from everywhere else. The other day, there was a story in the New York Daily News, I think, about an immigrant who'd come here from Yemen 12 years ago. This happened right after the tragedy in San Bernardino. And all this time he's been trying to get his wife and 4 kids here, and he's working at one of these quick stop places in New York City, and 2 robbers come in with pistols and say, empty the cash register. And he was terrified. He opened the cash register, put the money in his hand, according to the news story, and looked at it and said, I've just had this job for a year. This is not my money, and it's not yours. And he slapped at the gun hand of the person standing closest to him. The gun goes off, misses him by a few inches. The bullet goes into the counter right by him. Then these gunmen, praise God, were not entirely stupid. They realized they had just fired a weapon in broad daylight in New York City. So they ran out of the store. He goes next door, calls the police, waits and makes a police report. His boss is so thrilled that he gives him the afternoon off. He went home and pulled out his prayer mat and prayed, thanks that his life was spared, and hoped that his family would someday be able to join him. That guy is more representative of most Muslims in America than what happened in San Bernardino. And yesterday I read a story about Kenya, which is basically 85% Christian, 15% Muslim, but the further north you go, the more Muslim it gets. And these Christians were riding on a bus, and we work there, my foundation does, so I'll make full disclosure, I like the place. And they were stopped by al-Shabaab terrorists. And they said, we want to separate the Muslims and the Christians, it's obviously going to kill them. And they saw it coming, so the Muslims went around giving headscarves to the Christian women and otherwise trying to disguise them, and they risked their lives to save the Christian minority. It's very important that we stand against terrorists who try to abuse religion for any purpose and any religion to murder people. It's important that we not be chumps when we decide what security provisions should be employed to check people's background. But we don't want to run away from the place we've been. That America is a place that welcomes all people who are willing to treat other people the way they'd like to be treated, willing to follow the law, willing to create a common community. Now, so you have to have inclusive economics, inclusive social policy, and then we got to have politics that are inclusive enough to actually get something done. And, you know, that means we're going to have to do something with all this dark money. I think it's crazy. Even if the Supreme Court says that billionaires can give all the money they want to politics, you ought not to be able to give it in secret. And we need some political reform in this country that deals with that. And we need to recognize something that has received almost no attention in this election, which is that in all probability, the next president of the United States will make between 1 and 3 appointments to the United States Supreme Court. And I know who I want doing that. And finally, we've made a lot of progress under President Obama on the environment, saving the auto industry, advances for LGBT rights, trying to work out the extreme difficulties involved in supporting immigration reform, but not letting anybody just show up at the border and jump ahead of everybody else who's been waiting in line for years. He's worked through a lot of that, and a lot of it, especially in the environment and healthcare, will be reversed if you get a Republican Congress and a Republican president. And we need to stop that. So if that's what the election's about, how do you have inclusive prosperity, inclusive social policy, more inclusive politics, and stop us from going in reverse at the very moment when we're poised to grow together? Who's the best person to do it? Hillary! Look, she's here speaking for herself. I won't go through all the details of her plan, but I have reviewed it. And I think it is the plan which offers the best chance to have the most rapid movement to more broadly shared prosperity. And let me remind you, we now 2 years ago, in late 2014, about a year and 3 months ago, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of my library opening in Arkansas. Some of you were there. So anyway, this reporter asked me just out of the blue, well, what are you most proud of? What's the most important thing you did? And I don't think I've even brought it in here, but I happen to have a little chart that showed that as compared with President Reagan's term, which was the best trickle-down time, because that's the first time we'd ever basically spent more money and cut taxes at the same time in peacetime to that extent. We had 50% more jobs, but the most important thing was 100 times as many people worked their way from poverty into the middle class. They worked their way there. And it was fascinating. The top 5% actually did slightly better under President Reagan than me. Everybody else did better in the 1990s. The 60 to 80% people, about a third better, 30%. The ones in the middle, 70% better. 20 to 40% earners, more than twice as much income growth. But listen to this, the bottom 20%, their incomes increased 0.7% in the 1980s and 23.6% in the 1990s. We grew together. We can do this. And so I think what Hillary wants to do with creating jobs in the clean energy economy, I think this Paris Agreement was great, by the way. It's going to open up millions of new jobs for America. With modernized infrastructure, with more research, with making sure the banking rules don't cost too much to make small business loans, and understanding we can do that without imperiling the heart of Dodd-Frank. All those things are really important. Paul Krugman, the leading progressive economist in our country, said Hillary, of all the candidates running, had the toughest program to ensure that we wouldn't repeat the abuses of the past. And so I think those are good programs. I think what she's offered on the prescription drug abuse and heroin problem, on the Alzheimer's issue, on many other health issues that we face are good. I think it's obvious that now that we got 90% of our people insured, we got to keep going the rest of the way. But I want to say to you, there's a story in the paper today about how young people are leading the way this year in increasing enrollment in the healthcare plans, and more than 2 million of them. And if that happens, the spike we had in premiums this year will not be repeated next year. Because what happens is, if you try to drive everybody away, especially in the states that didn't take the Medicaid expansion, you get people who are my age, and we spend more money in health care than younger people do. So the more age mix we've got, the more your premiums will stay down. So I like her plans there. I like the fact that in an uncertain world where borders look more like nets than walls and nobody's in total control, she understands what it takes to keep our country as safe as possible, to stop big bad things from happening and make as many good things happen as possible. When she was Secretary of State, she negotiated those sanctions on Iran and unbelievably got Russia and China to sign off on them. I didn't think she could do that. And they made a difference. Even the people that don't like the Iranian nuclear deal agree the sanctions were good. The only thing that has survived the estrangement of the United States and Russia from our attempt to do better is something called the New START Treaty, negotiated by Hillary's State Department, which makes us much safer from the prospect of an accidental or intentional nuclear exchange. In a dangerous world, I think that's a pretty good deal. And one of the things that I love, because, you know, you got to make more friends all along, too, is that the PEPFAR program, President Bush's finest accomplishment, which funds our efforts against AIDS, TB, and malaria, was saving 1.7 million lives with the money we were spending on it when Hillary took office. When she left with the same amount of money by buying generic drugs, we were saving 3 times as many lives, 5.4 million. That's unbelievable. 5.1 million. Now, this will never be a headline in this election because nobody knows the names of any of those 3.4 million people. Principally in Africa, but not entirely. But I'll tell you what, in the countries where those people live, they like America a lot better, which is why our approval rating was 20 points higher on average around the world when she left office. But I want to just close by something that's personal to me. Every presidential election, people run, and believe it or not, it's kind of scary this year, but believe it or not, most everybody actually tries to do what they say they're going to do when they're running. They're telling you what they believe. And so you got to take them seriously. But you also have to take seriously whether they have any chance of doing what they say they're going to do or any record of doing it. So this is what I want to say, things that a lot of you may not know. When we met, it'll soon be 45 years ago, in a couple of months when we met. Man, we fell in love. I thought she was the most amazing person because unlike now, where more than half the law students in America are women, then they were a distinct minority. And there she was at Yale Law School. She could have written her ticket to go anywhere she wanted. All she was really interested in was providing legal services to poor people. When we got out, she could have gone to work, big law firm, get a fancy clerkship. She took a job with the Children's Defense Fund. There was a nice story in the press you may have seen in the last several days talking about a trip she took to Alabama to see if these so-called tax-exempt private schools were really just segregation academies and therefore not entitled to the tax exemption. I valued even more a trip she took to South Carolina to see why so many African-American children were being held in adult prisons. It's hard to remember 40 years ago what things were like. She hadn't been elected to anything, but everything she touched, she made better. Then she came home to Arkansas to be with me, and we were teaching in the law school, and she started the first legal aid clinic we ever had. She used to get me to drive her out to see her clients and stuff. And there was, I'll never forget the day, she was supposed to go actually formally get the acceptance of the legal system in this town where the university is for her running legal aid. So we had to go before the judge who was in charge. And he was a crusty old guy named Tom Butt, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and bow ties and looked over those glasses at you like there was something wrong with you, and he just hadn't figured it out yet. So Hillary's standing there and he says to her, I remember this like yesterday, he said, you know, I don't like legal aid very much, and I don't like lady lawyers very much. So help me God, he used that phrase. Within 6 months, she changed his opinion on both. She hadn't done anything. I get elected governor, and we're in Little Rock. And we had been just killed by some of the economic developments that we faced. And one day Hillary walked in and said, you know, we got all these poor families. Many of their parents have never had any education, and they're doing their best. And I just read about a program in Israel called HIPPY, believe it or not, Home Instruction Program for Preschool Youngsters. It was set up to teach parents to be their kids' first teachers, even if they didn't have any education themselves, for immigrant kids coming into Israel who didn't speak Hebrew or English. She said, I think it would really work in the Mississippi Delta and in the Ozark Mountains, which were then our version of Appalachia. And I said, well, it sounds interesting, but what are you going to do? She said, oh, I just called the woman that started the program, and she'll be here in 10 days, and we're going to set one up. Before you knew it, there were hippie programs in more than 25 states. Still the largest there. There were thousands of kids. Before there was any talk of universal preschool or quality child care standards or anything, thousands of kids got off to a better start in life because she made one phone call and followed through. And she hadn't been elected to anything. She was just a change maker. Then I put her in charge of the education standards movement in our state at a time when a national expert said we had the worst school system in America in Arkansas. When I came here running for president 9 years later, the same guy said that Arkansas and South Carolina had the most improved schools in America. She did that, and she hadn't been elected to anything. And so we go to the White House. We try to pass health care reform. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate. She didn't give up. She kept working with Senator Kennedy and others, and we passed the Children's Health Insurance Program. There are 12 million kids insured under that program now. It was the biggest expansion of health care between Medicare and the passage of the Affordable Care Act under President Obama. And then she did another thing even better than getting China and Russia to sign off on the Iran sanctions. She got the Republican House leader, Tom DeLay, who was he was the Ted Cruz of the pre-Tea Party era. And he disliked me, I think, more than anybody else in Congress. So she comes in to see me one day. She said, I found it. I found it. I said, what? She said, I found the human streak in Tom DeLay. And she meant it as a compliment. I said, what do you mean? She said, he is an adoptive parent. She said, you know, Bill, the foster care system is totally overloaded. We're not moving enough kids into adoption. These kids are aging out of foster care with nowhere to go, no supports, no guarantee of a college education, no guarantee of job training. What are they going to do? We got to get adoptions up. And because Congressman DeLay had adopted children, he understood it, and he helped her. And I think the only time he ever darkened the door of my administration was to come to the bill signing of the bill that he and Hillary did together that increased adoptions out of foster care by 65% before I left office. And then, you know, after I left the White House, I tried to do what I learned from her to do. Just start with where you are and get something done, make something happen. She's a senator. She was the first New York senator ever to serve on the Armed Services Committee. This is highly relevant today. A young officer walked up to me in the Capitol one day when I was there testifying on health care through my foundation. He said, "Mr. President, you don't know me, but I represent the Pentagon on Capitol Hill, and I just want you to know that we think your wife knows more about our issues and about the challenges military families are facing than any member of the Senate or the House in either party. It's astonishing what she's done on that committee." And then, last summer, I was at a party, totally non-political event, and a man I didn't know came up to me and he said, "You don't know me because I wasn't in government when you were there, but I was the British Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. And you remember that in 2010, we almost lost the Irish peace process." I said, "Yeah, I remember. This is the 20th anniversary of the ceasefire we got in Northern Ireland, so I've been celebrating it this year." So he said, "I was desperate. We were at loggerheads. The thing was about to come apart. And I called Hillary. I said, 'Hillary, I know you don't have any responsibility for this now, but you're the only person who can fix it because of what you and your husband did.'" He said, "All I know is 36 hours later, everybody was back at the table, we'd solved the problem, and we kept it going." He said, "I'm telling you, she did that for a lot of people, and some of us would like to help her back." And so, why am I telling you this? Because of this. When I was president, it made a big impact on me because of what you did for me. That I was only the second president of a small state to become president. The first was Franklin Pierce. And so I started pretty much with Franklin Pierce, reading everything I could in those 8 years about my less well-known predecessors. And here's what I concluded. Almost everybody goes into the White House with the best of intentions. Whether they succeed or not depends upon whether their instincts, their experience, their knowledge, and their psychological makeup fits the time. Franklin Pierce's only child was killed in a railroad accident when he was on the way to become president. He and his wife were depressed for a year, and the country was coming apart at the seams anyway. I think there are almost no circumstances under which he could have succeeded. But he had a great career in the Mexican War. He had a good career in Congress. He was a good governor here. The times took him out. Abraham Lincoln, had he governed in the 1950s, might never have been regarded as a great president because he was gripped by crippling depression. It was only in the blood of the Civil War that somehow he burned through his own feelings and absorbed the grief of the nation and let his depression go. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I do not believe in my lifetime anybody has run for this job at a moment of great importance who was better qualified by knowledge, experience, and temperament to do what needs to be done now to restore prosperity, to deal with these human issues, to make us as safe as possible.